Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Destiny video. This is going to be my review for the Warmind comic issue number 2, and then afterwards we'll also discuss the campaign, the story presented in the game about Warmind from the expansion. So yeah, let's just jump straight in here with Warmind number 2. So there's the cover, Anna Bray with the, I assume it's the Polaris Lance, or else it's the prototype version that you get over the course of the quest. Either way, it's that same model of gun that we see her on the cover with. But yeah, before we get into the specifics here, let's get some general opinions about this book. I think this is an okay issue. I don't love it. I thought the first issue had a lot of potential because I felt like they were really going to get into some really good setup for the plot, because the ultimate problem with the campaign, the game's story, is that, one, there just really isn't all that much of it. They don't set up enough. Rasputin, who is the Warmind, is not focused upon enough, is not presented as a character really up until right at the end. And it's just this, again, this mistake that they keep making where they just avoid all of the important stuff and only focus on basically minor setup for the story missions that your Guardian kind of has to participate on, and then Anna is ultimately relegated to being just this like vendor, this NPC vendor as usual, and so it makes these comics not feel particularly important because they're setting up her story for the game, but she doesn't do a lot in the game. Because the game ends up focusing more on like the Valkyrie weapon more so than anything else, basically. Like that weapon is in a way like the star of the campaign more so than Anna Bray as a character, Rasputin as a character, as a concept, the Warsats, the Warminds, and so on. So it ends up just feeling kind of weird, like that this comic is attempting to like give all this motivation to Anna as a character through this relationship with Cameron, but it kind of fails a little bit because Cameron isn't really mentioned in the game. I think there's like a grimoire card or two, lore tab or two. She is mentioned like by name, but not like who she is really in the narrative preview. But it feels like, given the focus that relationship gets here, it is the comic basically. Seeing the death of Cameron, the impact that it has on Anna, and then Anna kind of having to move past Cameron while still sort of being inspired to go on because of her. It feels like it should have been more of a focus in the game, that this is what has sort of brought Anna in a way to you, that she's pursuing this as strongly as she is, and is in contact with you, helping her, because she's been moved to get to this point by Cameron. And because it's not in the game, it makes this not feel particularly important. That, okay, if that motivation isn't present in the core story, why are we actually going back to focus on it? And that's why I think most people, in a way, would have preferred if this comic specifically focused on setting up Rasputin better, the relationship with Anna and Rasputin, the origin of Rasputin. Anything like that would have been better, because it's those details, the technical details of the story, that are missing from the main story of Warmind, and where it's like this, in a way, the focus of this comic arguably should have been Anna's character arc within the game, and you sort of wonder why Cameron isn't really mentioned all that much. Why are they sort of hiding almost this relationship in the comic? The comic is sort of meant to give you this kind of prelude into the story, but they just, I think, mix up where things are meant to be, and that I don't have too many problems with this. I think the art is very good. I think what's here is written fairly well. It's just that these two issues together don't really amount to much in a way. It's just this like trek across the ice that doesn't accomplish as much as it needs to. In that, like, yeah, it's more time with Anna, but the fact that we don't learn all that much about Anna in the game detracts from this, and it's almost more like, just present more information. And that's why, in a way, it feels for sure still like they haven't managed to write Destiny stories well outside of Grimoire cards. That outside of just pure text in that lore-focused Grimoire card style, they haven't really managed to nail a story down just yet. The comics for sure have their good moments. There are some good moments within the games, but it's all Grimoire card stuff. It's all the speculation from fans bringing it together. They haven't managed to bring it together and present a full story themselves effectively just yet. So we'll get through this fairly quickly, because as we'll see, the exact details of what every single panel says here are not as important here. There's nothing to really read into, because we're not talking about anything complicated here. The entirety of these 12 pages ultimately is about what inspires Anna to get out of this situation where she's drowning. She's about to die her final death because she doesn't have her light. This relationship with Cameron, the flashback to Cameron's death, and moving on in a way from Cameron while still being inspired by her, as we'll see. So that's what we set up here. She's in the water, she's drowning, she's sort of unconscious. She has this flashback to Cameron, who is dying, and we learn over the course of these panels that they've been working together obviously for a while on investigating Anna's past, and something went wrong on part of one of these missions. Anna sort of blames herself for this, for Cameron being in this, terrible state where she's on the verge of dying here, unable to properly save her. But Cameron, of course, because of their closeness, doesn't blame her because she's here of her own free will, wants to help her because she cares for Anna. And we see this, it's part of that kind of guilt. We start to get into this dynamic that's between them, where Cameron's a human, Anna, of course, is a human, but she's a guardian. So it almost makes her very different, because she can die so many times, she doesn't have to care as much about dying. And whereas for Cameron, her first death is her death, and that's what we get here. It's that's what it means to be human. Love, we adapt, we endure, we fight, even against death, which we know is going to claim us someday. We still refuse to surrender, and it's giving her this kind of human motivation as a guardian who also knows about her most of her life as a human. It's kind of getting that human side into the guardian personality of Anna here, by basically saying that even without your light, you can still be driven by your human side, even if you're missing your guardian powers, through love and just the unwillingness to surrender. And that's the situation that she's in. She's almost given up underwater without her powers. And what's going to drive her to get back to the surface? It's fulfilling the mission that is her mission, to find out about her past. But because Cameron, her girlfriend, sacrificed herself for that, she owes it to her to continue with her journey, because this is a journey they both kind of participated in. And this is where I think it's a fairly well written relationship. It's just that the character of Cameron feels kind of thrown in because she's not used elsewhere, really, outside of like a slight mention or two. Whereas I feel they should have found some way to incorporate this dynamic into the game. I think that would have been a really interesting thing to come out of it. Whereas I think from a comic, you expect it to be a little bit more detail focused on specifics of story. But it is actually fairly well written for what it is. And we see that, she's obviously in no condition. They have the pulse monitor going through most of this, getting across that she's dying here. We get the kiss scene, and confirming 100% that they are actually a couple, which is interesting. And I think this is where, like, if they were committing to having these issues be the origin of this relationship, they probably should have explained like how they met and stuff like that as well. But we move on and we see that this is effectively the death of Cameron here. We see the flat line, and Anna in the distance, you don't see her eyes, darkness, kind of shadow over Cameron. It's the death. Pretty emotional stuff. And then we flash back to what's going on, flash forward I suppose, what's going on in the present. And this is where, it's the inspiration. How does she get out of this situation? And it's, again, she goes back to what Cameron said to her, what it means to be human, love, what's driving her forward, adapting, the human side here. This is human Anna, no guardian powers here, getting herself out of this situation. Even against death, we still refuse to surrender. And it's a nice callback. It's just that, I suppose the core of your second issue, focusing half of its content on just like explaining how Anna basically swims back up to the surface, feels a little bit like, we've only had 4 comics in 4 years of Destiny, and you're gonna like use half of one of them to just explain how someone gets out of the water. It's good motivation stuff, but like for a short comic, it's like, I think, a little bit too much time spent on what it's trying to do. We see the ghost kind of heals her a little bit, but they have to reach the cradle. That's the focus here. And the ghost kind of wants to turn back, but Anna kind of, puts her foot down here. She wants to do this, and as you can see, she's very inspired by Cameron here. And the question here is actually quite interesting. Am I a guardian because the light chose me, or did the light choose me because I was already a guardian? The idea of, was the power granted to someone who had the complete potential to use it effectively, or does she have the potential to use it effectively because she was granted the power? And that's the question. Is it more about the person who Anna is, or is it the power that's allowing her to do any of this? And I think what this comic is very much trying to get across is that it's more about Anna's personality, her experiences being the thing that really define her, and then the powers are just a bonus that allows her to maybe accomplish a little bit more than she otherwise could have. But we move on. We find out here, I suppose, is over the next couple of panels, that the Cameron that we saw in issue 1 on this kind of hollow thing isn't any sort of an AI or anything like that. It is just recordings of her, that as she's been dying, as she's been injured, she's made all these recordings to send to Anna. And I suppose this is where she's like listening to the last couple of them, and she realizes that this is kind of Cameron talking about not wanting to hold back Anna, that they're both on this mission, but now that she's injured, Anna's focusing more of her time on helping her, trying to help her heal, being her nursemaid, as we see here, and that's detracting from Anna's ability to fulfill her goal. And obviously they haven't talked about this, but this is how, because Cameron cares, she doesn't want her injuries basically to hold Anna back, even though Anna cares about her. And she's sending these kind of messages to kind of help her, even though she knows she's going to be gone at some point. Here it is, I refuse to be the thing that keeps you from finding the answers that will finally let you sleep peacefully. And we see here that there's a storm coming. This happens very quickly. It's almost like, wait, what's happening? But she has to very quickly pack up everything, put it on her ship. She kind of gets caught in the storm here. The recording, where all the recordings are stored, gets kind of lost. She goes to kind of go after it because she doesn't want to lose Cameron again. She doesn't want to see her, in a way, die for the second time. And is, again, kind of on the verge of kind of losing hope here again. She's in another position where, will she be able to get out of this one when the light comes back all of a sudden? And this is obviously like our Guardians doing from the original Destiny story, the end of the kind of what's happening there, the Traveler bursting out of the thing to stop Gaul. But here we go, but if humanity is going to survive, what comes next? We need answers, and we need a better way. It's up to you to show them. And we see her, I suppose this is the light kind of empowering her again, and she's immediately able to like power out and get back to where she needs to be. I may not be there to see you stand beside Rasputin. This is obviously Cameron talking, but know that whatever we have had to sacrifice to get there has been worth it. No matter what secrets you uncover about Clovis Bray, you will always be my family. So that's a nice one, just showing their relationship. And Jinju here, her ghost, says, I have all the recordings backed up, I could play them whenever. but this is, I suppose, the growth over the course of this story. No, I appreciated very much Little Light, but no. She did what she promised. She got us here. Let Cameron rest. That, it is this kind of thing of her accepting that she's gone. She doesn't need to constantly, I suppose, lie to herself that she's still around through these messages. And it is better ultimately for both of them that the messages are gone and she's not relying on them. And so here she's kind of analyzed, she's recognized, I suppose, by the facility, by Rasputin, as being Anna Bray, and this is her, arriving in there. I think the ultimate problem with this comic is just that this as the ending is kind of like, well, what is this? Like, my assumption is that the trailer for Warmind happens immediately after this. But then it's kind of like, oh, the story, trying to remember the story of Warmind and how little there really was. And that, like, Anna, Clovis Bray, the discoveries there, it's like, the story ends up being just, from the game, basically this argument between Zavala and Anna about trusting Rasputin or not. And the idea is that she knows Rasputin because she was involved in his creation, involved in his kind of, I suppose, development to this level of intelligence, more or less. And she trusts him, whereas Zavala doesn't, because Zavala's been, I suppose, there to experience all these moments where Rasputin maybe could have helped them, did something different, and so on. And it's all about, should we let Rasputin help us or not? And that's the story. That's more or less what the entire story comes down to. It's us working together to make all of this stuff happen, and rather than just getting to Rasputin, they add in the whole Nokris Zal stuff in to give a reason for a lot of fighting to happen. The problem is none of it gets development. Nokris being like Oryx's forgotten son is given no development outside of them telling us that exact wording almost, that, oh yeah, Nokris is his lost son, and he's made this pact with Zal where he is a hive who basically does all this resurrection but gains no power. It's the difference of like the sword logic thing where like Oryx and his sisters gained power by killing each other, so they gained the power of basically killing other powerful beings, but Nokris more has the power of just, if he's killed, he resurrects like himself because of the power he has, and so he doesn't gain power from his resurrection, and so it's kind of cheating sword logic, but none of that's really presented here. They say like, oh, he's a necromancer, which is like weird for the hive, weird that Zal's doing this, and that's where this was their opportunity to really go in depth in the story, in the game, on the hive gods and explain the whole situation there. Because you can't, I think the weird thing with Destiny is that all of the best story come from the Grimoire cards. The Books of Sorrow is the best stuff, and that's a lot of Grimoire cards, which realistically a lot of people haven't read. And so this was your opportunity to actually, in the game, present a cutscene, a kind of animated graphical type thing like they tend to do at the start of all of these expansions, and just explain the kind of pantheon of hive worm gods, some of the basics of like how Oryx came to power, adding stuff to the Taken King, taking stuff from that, explaining Nokris, who he is, the whole situation with Zal. Like, imagine we saw a cutscene of that exact kind of sequence of like Zal and Nokris making that deal, them kind of leaving in a way that the other worm gods to kind of go about what they were planning to do. And the problem is just like, it's this weird thing where like, what exactly are they here for? They're here to take over Rasputin? ? And like, Rasputin is like awakening, something's happening on Mars like because of them, but like it's such a kind of like confused story where it feels like the intent was more like, here's a way for you to fight the hive in a Warmind expansion because that's what we want to happen. And Rasputin, who is one of the more interesting characters from the lore, the Grimoire cards, the lore tabs, isn't much of a character. He just gives you the Valkyrie from time to time, helps you right at the end, and then says something at the end that he'll protect humanity in his own way, which is cool, but it's only cool right at the end. And then similarly, once again, it's another case where the quest lines after the main story are more interesting than the story itself, but the problem is that those quest lines don't actually have any cutscenes. So it's all reading the little lore entries that you get and stuff like that, and it feels somewhat unimportant because most people are just going to do the quest to get the rewards and not to read the story and how interesting that is, because like we learn who like the Exo Stranger is over the course of like some of these kind of reveals. There's some very good stuff in the Grimoire tabs this time out, but none of it's kind of surface level in the game. That's always been the problem. And this is where it ultimately comes down to, like, Bungie got it wrong, or like purposefully didn't listen to the community about this when we said we don't want the game, the story of this game to just be on your website. And so what they did was, instead of saying like, oh yeah, we just make the story better in the game, but leave the Grimoire cards where they are to give this extra detail, they took all of that away, basically. Took away Grimoire cards, replaced it with lore tabs, which aren't as good because there's not as many of them. They're not as just obvious because they're attached to often hard to get items and weapons, and it feels like we have less story now than we had previously because of all of this that's happened, and everything that they said about story being better in Destiny 2, like Vicarious Visions saying they spent like 2 years in the story of this. It's kind of like, yeah, sure you did. Okay, 2 years on writing this story. Yeah, that makes sense. That looks correct. It feels like this. They made a mistake. They made mistakes here, and I think ultimately it was a case of, we sort of knew that this expansion specifically wasn't going to be overly affected by a lot of the changes that they were making over the past couple of months. But come September, when the big expansion comes out, that's when I think it's going to be make or break for them. They have to get the story right. It has to be Taken King level, where it has interest across everything in the story. The story's linked together. It's longer. It's more in depth. You care about it. I hope they get that right, because this could be very bad for the game if they don't. And they need to be aware that the story needs to be changed and done better, just as much as some of the like loot-based stuff does as well. So I didn't feel overly strongly about the story. There were some nice moments, mainly again from some of the new lore tabs, and I think it was let down because I thought the narrative preview was well done. I thought the setup from Warmind issue 1 was well done, and I think Warmind issue 2, this one that we just reviewed, is actually a solid comic at just getting across this relationship. I think the problem is just that this relationship only exists in this comic and is basically not a factor in anything else, in like stuff that we knew about Anna Bray from before, stuff that we knew about Anna Bray from the game and most of the Grimoire cards. And that's the problem. If Anna Bray in the game talked about how, you know, she's doing this for Cameron, she explained to you who Cameron was, what happened, you maybe saw the flashback of how she got injured in the game, you used the fact that you put out this comic and some players of the game will have read it, and add more context to that. That's, you know, telling a good story. But Anna in the game is just you know, I trust Rasputin, and it's just that over and over again. You don't really see her do all that much, and it's that, you know, it's that difference between the character as presented in the lore, as presented in this comic, versus in the game, where your Guardian has to do all of the action, but Anna is apparently one of, if not the most powerful hunters in the Destiny universe. You know, there's that mission back in like Destiny 1 where like you're going through like parts of where like the Battle of the Twilight Gap took place, and there's like these pools of light that have remained there for years, which is where Anna used her power. That's how powerful she is, that she left these like like eternal pools of light behind, basically, and you know that's not addressed, that she's that powerful. Like, where was she in the final battle? Like, that's another problem. We kill a worm god in this expansion, one of the biggest setup things, like the whole our worm gods Ahamkara type stuff, and we just kill one of them with the Valkyrie, which is obviously super powered at that point, but still, your guns still do damage to it, and like Anna's kind of nowhere to be seen in the battle. It would have been cool if like they did it a little bit like the Curse of Osiris final battle, where like Osiris kind of gives you the opening to kind of do the damage. It would have been cool if Anna comes in and she has this, like, she is super powerful, like her golden gun can stun us all, and then you can hit him with the lance, the Valkyrie. That would have worked, but they obviously did it the way they did it, and it's disappointing. I assume they will at some point probably reverse that and say that like worm gods don't die. You know, we killed it in the physical world, but we didn't kill it in like its throne world, so it's not properly dead and it can come back. Same with Nokris, but we have to wait and see what happens there. There's still more Hive stuff to come. They've been setting up the arrival of Savathun at some point, and I assume that might incorporate some of that stuff in as well. But yeah, that's been the video for today. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on Warmind issue number 2, as well as the Warmind story from the game, if you've played it. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.